All right, today we're going to dive into a really important but kind of hidden part of the financial world. We're talking about the specialist players, the experts who step in where traditional banks might not. I'm talking about non-banking finance companies, or NBFCs. Let's get into what makes these guys tick.
So just imagine for a second, you need something really specific financially. Maybe you need to lease a fleet of trucks for your business, or you're a tech startup that needs venture capital. Sure, you could go to a big bank, but what if there were companies built from the ground up to do just that one thing? Well, that's exactly the gap these specialized companies are here to fill. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll figure out what these not-a-bank banks actually are. Then, we'll look at how they even get started, who keeps them in line, the super important safety rules they have to play by, and finally, why all of this matters in the big picture.
Okay, let's start with the absolute basics. What in the world is a non-banking finance company? It sounds a little weird, right? Let's peel back the layers and see what's really going on here.
So, at its heart, an NBFC is a company that gets a special license from the regulator, in this case, the SECP. And that license gives them the green light to offer very specific financial services. Now, they're dealing with money, sure, but here's the key. They are not traditional banks. They don't take deposits from you and me in the same way your corner bank does.
And when I say specialists, I mean it. The variety is huge. Think of the financial world like a big sports team. The major banks, they're your all-rounders. They can play almost any position. But NBFCs, they're the star players recruited for one specific job. You've got your leasing experts, your housing finance pros, and the venture capital gurus willing to bet on the next big idea. They do one thing, and they do it really, really well.
So this brings us to a super clear distinction. On one side, you have the NBFCs, the specialists, laser-focused on one service, and they answer to the SECP. On the other side, you've got traditional banks, the all-arounders, with that huge menu of services, and they're overseen by the central bank, the SBP. Understanding this split is honestly fundamental to getting how the whole financial system works.
Now, you can't just wake up one morning, have a great idea, and start an NBFC. Nope. Because we're talking about other people's money and the health of the market, the process to get approval is incredibly tough and for a very, very good reason.
It's basically a three-step gauntlet you have to run. First, you need the SECP's permission just to form the company. That's like getting permission to even think about building the house. Second, you have to get a specific license for exactly what you plan to do. If you want to be a leasing company, you need a leasing license. Simple as that. And third, and this is a big one, you have to prove you have enough cash, or capital, in the bank before you can even think about opening for business. It makes sure you're starting on solid financial ground.
So, with all this financial power, there's got to be someone making sure it's used responsibly, right? Of course. The SECP isn't just there at the beginning, it's the strict referee watching every single play to make sure the game is fair and safe for everyone.
And believe me, this referee has a lot of power. The SCP can issue direct orders that an NBFC has to follow. If something smells fishy, they can force a special audit of the company's books or launch a full-scale investigation. They can even step in and remove a CEO or a director if they think that person is a danger to the company or its customers. But their ultimate power? Well, it's even bigger than that.
Yeah, just let that sink in for a second. If the SECP believes that the entire board of directors is running a company into the ground or acting against the public's interest, it has the authority to just step in and take over. It can supersede the whole board. That's the ultimate safety switch to protect the system.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. We're talking about the actual rules of the game. And these aren't just friendly suggestions. They are hard, non-negotiable limits designed to stop these companies from taking on way too much risk and blowing themselves up.
This is probably the oldest rule in the book when it comes to finance, and it's baked right into the regulations. These rules, known as exposure limits, are all about preventing a company from betting its entire future on one single client or one group of connected companies. Because if that one client goes down, you don't want them taking the whole NBFC with them.
So here's the first magic number, 20%. An NBFC is not allowed to lend or invest more than 20% of its own money, its own capital base, to any single person or company. This forces them to spread their bets. It's a mandatory diversification rule that acts as a crucial safety buffer. Now that limit gets bumped up a little, to 25% if we're talking about a whole group of related companies. The rule recognizes that big business groups work together, but it still puts a very clear ceiling on just how exposed an NBFC can be to the fate of any one corporate family.
Okay, this next one is all about something called leverage, which is just a fancy way of saying how much money you've borrowed compared to how much you actually have. For most of these NBFCs, their total debts can't be more than 10 times their own capital. This rule is so important because it stops a company from getting overextended and keeps it from collapsing under the weight of its own debt.
And the list of safety nets goes on. For example, they can't go wild in the stock market. Their investments there are capped at half of their equity. They also have to build up a rainy day fund by putting aside at least 20% of their profits every single year. And if they're going to make a loan without any collateral, it can only be to another super stable, highly rated financial institution. See, every rule is like another brick in this wall of financial safety.
Now this one, I actually find this one brilliant in its simplicity. To fight against things like money laundering, there's a very clear line drawn in the sand. An NBFC simply cannot deal in cash for any transaction over 50,000 rupees. That's it. It forces all significant transactions into the formal banking system where they leave a digital trail. It's a simple rule with a huge impact on transparency.
Okay, so we've talked about what NBFCs are, how they get started, and this whole complex web of rules they live by. But let's just zoom out for a second and ask the most important question of all. Why should we even care? Why does any of this matter?
At the end of the day, this whole strict system isn't about holding businesses back. It's about letting them move forward safely. It protects all of our money. It prevents a problem at one company from creating a domino effect that takes down the whole system. And it builds trust. Without trust, nobody would use these services. So really, this framework creates a safe sandbox where these innovative, specialized companies can do their thing and provide services that our economy really needs.
And that leaves us with a really big question for the future. In a world that's all about fintech, digital payments, and very niche financial needs, you've got to wonder, is the future of finance going to be owned by the big all-rounder banks or by these quick, focused, agile specialists? That's a question that's going to be really interesting to watch unfold.